Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Whispers Estate. My name is Rich Ballard, and I'm delighted to be with you here this afternoon, coming to you from the Whispers Estate here in downtown Mitchell, Indiana. I am the current owner of the house, and I have decided to do some podcasts from the home, mainly because of interest of guests and people who are familiar with the home. My plan with these podcasts is really simple, yet probably somewhat ambitious. The goal here, of course, is to have a live podcast from the house at least once a month. The initial plan was to do it at the end of May, and we had all kinds of technical issues doing the first podcast. Recorded almost a 30-minute session, and for some strange reason, the last 16 minutes of the podcast just kind of disappeared. And I'm not going to make any excuses and suggest to you there was anything paranormal there. Probably just an equipment malfunction, but nevertheless, it did push the podcast back here to June 2nd. And hopefully we won't have any more technical difficulties as we move forward. Depending on the interest level of the viewers and the listeners, I might even do more than one podcast a month. Once again, it just depends on how many people show interest in it, and the interest level will determine how many podcasts come from the house. I currently plan on podcasting live. This podcast itself is not live, but the next one will be from the house towards the end of each month, and ultimately filming live from a different room of the house during each podcast. I have several people who I'm really excited about being guests on the podcast, and they are going to appear either live with me here from the house or on the telephone, recording and talking to me from the telephone. Some of these guests will include Scott Wade and his wife Leslie Jolynn Lay Wade. Both were here at the very beginning when Whispers Estate first opened back in 2006. The original owner of the house was a gentleman by the name of Jared Marshall. Scott and his wife have a lot of history of the house. In the early part of the house, his wife did a tremendous amount of the early research on the home, the historical research, helped giving us some documented evidence on who has actually lived, or in some cases, unfortunately, died in the house. Some of my other upcoming guests, of course, would be Miss Sandra Burris and Mrs. Gwen Ziegler. These two ladies, I call them the resident experts on the Whispers Estate. I would suggest to you there is no one that has more history and understanding with the house than these two women. And they're friends of mine, and Sandra and Gwen are both amazing ladies, and they have such amazing stories that they, of course, are going to share on an upcoming podcast. Richard Estep, noted author and television personality. Richard is an amazing author. He visits paranormal locations throughout the United States and often does historical research and ends up writing books about the homes. He was here at Whispers a few months ago and is currently in the process of writing a book about the Whispers Estate. He has agreed to appear on one of our upcoming podcasts. From Paranormal Encounters, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Connor Biddle and India Hopwood. Both will appear on a future episode. You can catch their many episodes in their investigatory exploits, whether you visit their YouTube page or you can even catch them on Amazon Prime. One of my famous, or I shouldn't say famous, I'm sorry, one of my favorite investigators, Mrs. Kim Kinser, an established paranormal investigator, has agreed to appear in one of the upcoming podcasts. I've been fortunate enough to travel with Kim and do some investigations with her. Her knowledge, her enthusiasm, her overall expertise and positivity is contagious, and I really am excited about Kim being on an upcoming podcast. Nationally recognized psychic Joy Lee is also agreed to be on an upcoming podcast. Joy, I met about 5 years ago. A group had invited her to the house, and she came here and basically did a code read of the home. Had never even heard of Mitchell, Indiana. Joy is not from this area. And some of the things she told us about the house, some of the information she gave us was dead on from what we'd heard from the historical research on the house. I'm not, one of these people who believe everyone that tell me they're a psychic. Anyone can claim to be a psychic. Boy, I tell you, when you bump into someone or get to meet someone who can do cold reads and really know so much about a site or a house or any type of place where an investigation is being done, it's quite impressive. There will be many more as each week I plan to have guests who are willing to share their own journey and experiences in the world of the paranormal. I would suggest to you probably the most boring part of any podcast, or certainly this podcast, is I do think it is fitting and necessary for me to spend just a couple minutes introducing myself. As I said earlier, my name is Rich Ballard. I bought the Whispers Estate in March of 2020. I had personally visited the house over 40 times before purchasing the home, both in an investigating role and as a psychologist who teaches psychology at both the college and high school level. I had an epiphany about 5 years ago where I would bring psychology students on a field trip to the home after we finished our unit on parapsychology. Amazing events occurred in the home when you get these young people in here with all their energy and, of course, their enthusiasm for coming to a real haunted house. I personally began investigating in 2012 as a major skeptic, agnostic, spiritually. I really approach it all as a scientist. As a psychologist, I have to have evidence and some type of a proof before I can go forward and say, yeah, there's probably something paranormal or something unknown occurring here. My first foray into the paranormal world was a 2-hour mini investigation tour that I did at the Waverly Hills Sanitarium in Louisville, Kentucky. Even though it was somewhat of a quiet night in an investigatory sense, it did tweak my interest. And as a result, I began traveling and looking for places to visit. I spent the last 9 years investigating as many locations as my schedule, and as many of you probably know who do this, my pocketbook can accommodate. Currently, I think I've counted, I've been to over 35 different locations and several hundred investigations in total. Besides my experiences at the Whispers Estate, I would like to list some of the places, more of the notable investigations I've included. Obviously, the aforementioned Waverly Hills Sanitarium in Louisville, Kentucky. I visited the Monroe House 3 different times up in Hartford City, Indiana. Had an amazing couple nights up there investigating. One of my all-time favorite destinations is up in Villisca, Iowa, where I did visit the Villisca Axe Murder House. Once again, an amazing place to visit. I highly recommend, if you can get up there in that northern part of the Midwest, to visit that tragic site and all the things that happened there. A very interesting place to spend time in. Being a Hoosier, and most of you from this part of the country probably have heard of Randolph County Infirmary over in Winchester, Indiana. I have visited Randolph County Infirmary, I think 4 times now. One of my favorite places that turned out to be an amazing, what I would suggest to you, a very well-kept secret, is a place down in Walton, Kentucky, and it's called the Benton Farm. Also a very interesting place to visit. I have visited the Ashmore Estates in Ashmore, Illinois, drove over to Eastern Ohio and Bel Air, Ohio, and visited the Bel Air Mansion. The Sally House, I talked about Kim Kinser earlier. She invited me out to Atchison, Kansas, where she and I and her sister Angela, we spent time in both the Sally House and the McIntyre Villa. Had amazing experiences there. The Hobo Hill House on our way back to Indiana in Jefferson City, Missouri. We stopped for a night there and just had a great visit there at the Hobo Hill House in Jefferson City, Missouri. And of course, one of the more famous places that most of us have been to, who have been doing this a while here in the Midwest anyways, is Poasttown Elementary School there in Middletown, Ohio. I've also visited many private residences in which occupants have asked me or a group that I've been invited to come with, come to private homes and help determine if indeed they were dealing with some form or some sort of paranormal occurrences. Very briefly, I would like to share the history of the Whispers Estate for those of you who are unfamiliar with the house. I'll do very quick analysis of that and try to give you a quick synopsis of it. The Whispers Estate is a home, the earliest records we can find confirmed that the house was built in 1894 by a gentleman by the name of Dr. John White and his wife Sarah. We don't really know why the doctor and his wife never moved into the house. We really can't get to the bottom of that. We do know that in 1899 or possibly in 1901, depending on what resources you use there, a gentleman by the name of Dr. John Gibbons and his wife Jessie Gibbons would buy the house and move into it. Dr. John Gibbons would eventually establish his medical practice in the 3 rooms on the east side of the house. And for the next 3 decades, it appears that Dr. Gibbons will conduct his medical practice out of the house, performing a wide range of medical services. And if you look at some of the newspaper ads that he took out back in the early part of the 20th century, including surgeries, all kinds of interesting surgeries, if you will. Given the medical technology at the time, it's widely believed that there's a good likelihood that many patients would die in the house under the doctor's care. Once again, a previous owner had did some research and had talked to some local people, local historians, and I think they had confirmed that probably, we're guessing, around 23 people would eventually die in the surgery capacity here in the house under the doctor's care. Now, I would suggest to you, despite all the strange rumors and stories that surround the doctor, particularly in his later years, most evidence would suggest that for the most part, the man was a well-respected member of the the community, and obviously of his family. Regardless what you prefer to believe about the doctor, I don't think anyone can argue that the family itself suffered through a significant amount of tragedy and bad luck. It's widely believed that the doctor, Dr. John and his wife Jessie, adopted several abandoned or orphaned children throughout their marriage, and I would suggest it's with these children that the story takes somewhat of a tragic, if not dark, turn. Probably the most infamous or well-known of these stories in regards to the adopted children surrounded a little girl by the name of Rachel. We believe she was probably about 9 to 10 years old, who one evening snuck downstairs late one night. It's believed to have been right around Christmas, possibly even Christmas Eve. She snuck down the front stairs here in the front part of the house. And in that case, I think she was here to just kind of look underneath the Christmas tree. We don't know, but somehow she either brushed up against a tree, fell into it. Regardless, what we have learned is that she ended up severely burned. The doctor will keep the child sedated, but tragically enough, she would die from these burn wounds a couple days later in her upstairs bedroom. Several years later, a 10-month-old infant named Elizabeth also died in the master bedroom, but as far as we know, we were not sure how or why that happened. As far as we know right now, we just have unknown causes for that. The doctor's wife, Jessie Gibbons, would later die in the same master bedroom that's here in the house. We call it Jessie's room. She would die of double pneumonia. We do have that documented in the local newspaper. It's believed that Dr. Gibbons died in 1944. The house was left to his oldest foster child, a woman by the name of Helen, who would eventually sell the house to new owners. And throughout the succeeding decades, the house has been owned by several different people over the years. Stories of subsequent owners, occupants suggest that unfortunately many others have encountered their own demise in the house. One of the more famous ones is a gentleman by the name of Ora Hopper, who had bought the house in 1947 and even opened up an antique shop here in this room we're in right now, the Parlor Room. Somehow or another, the doctor would be found in his bathtub in the second floor. He had passed away, whether he had fallen and broken his neck. We have found evidence that he probably died of a heart attack in the bathtub. It was reported the unfortunate man lying in the tub undiscovered for 3 days, as his family had been out of town when he unfortunately passed away. Finally, we hear there are rumors that there are at least 4 graves in the backyard of the house, not including what several psychics have called a pit grave, which they say contained amputated limbs, internal organs, and possibly even aborted babies. We do know that abortion would have been illegal in Indiana back in the 1900s. But once again, psychics has told us that. To confirm or debunk this belief, I'm currently in the process of having a geologist who is an acquaintance of mine from Indiana University. And as a geologist, he has access to certain sonar equipment, and he has promised to bring that equipment here to the house sometime this summer, and to indeed help us confirm or debunk whether or not human remains are buried in the backyard. And my goal, of course, is to share these findings on a later podcast when I do have that information confirmed or debunked. So I tried to get through all of this pretty quickly tonight. Once again, as the first podcast, I didn't want to dominate this, telling you stories, personal stories about my own experiences in the house. If you visited a house, you probably have enough of your own to share. What my plan is as we move forward is to, like I said, try to have at least one podcast from a different room in the house each month. If the interest level is really good, I'll probably have more. And with my guests appearing, they will share their stories, how they ended up in the world of paranormal investigation, and possibly their own stories, personal stories about things that have happened to them here at the Whispers Estate. I also plan probably about the last 15 to 20 minutes, maybe even 30 minutes of each podcast, to have open lines where people will be welcome to call in to the podcast and ask questions of the guest, ask questions of me, maybe share their own personal experiences of how they have had their own paranormal experiences, whether they are here at Whispers Estate or wherever they might have experienced those. And we'll talk about the rules of those call-in people as you call into the house. We'll talk about what I'm going to require of anyone who does call in the house, probably on the next podcast. So with that said, I tried to get through all of this pretty quickly. Didn't want to bore you to tears here telling you my own personal experiences or my own personal destiny, how I ended up owning this house. Hopefully you enjoyed what little I shared with you about the house tonight. We encourage everyone who has an interest in the Whispers Estate, if you haven't visited us before, to please go to our website. You can find us at www.whispersestate.com. If you want to come visit the house, all you have to do is visit the website, click on reservations, look at our calendar, and see if there's a night that makes sense for you and your people. If you want to come visit the house, we do offer 8-hour investigations. Sunday through Thursday, we'll allow up to 10 people in the house in a private group, and you have the house for 8 hours for $200. And if you decide to come on weekends, because that is more of a prime time moment for everyone, I do ask for $300 a night if you decide to come with us, come visit us, I should say, on weekends. So thank you, everyone. I try my best to go very quick here to try to get through all of this. Hopefully you'll pay attention and look for our next podcast. As I said, I'm going to have Scott Wade and his wife here on our second one, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you.